And now we have returned to the second half of the first class on the 6 Proofs of Truth, a 4-part series that now that we've gotten through the description of what the 6 proofs are, which is the more potentially dry and intellectual side of things, we're beginning to see how they living philosophy that Vivekananda wanted, and how even it's very easily to dovetail this into the devotional arena, and that all beings are wondering about truth, and that people who are more sensitive, that is, and mindful and conscious, aware, subtle. Consciousness is subtle. Anuranian is a nice word in Sanskrit. It means subtle, subtlest of the subtle. So your mind waves and thoughts get subtler and subtler as they go inward. Unfortunately, the opposite's also true. They become grosser and grosser as they move outward in most cases, until they're focusing just on matter as if it were real. If you can come out and see the 5 elements and the sunset and the lake and the beauty of everything, and not lose your center, and know that it's changing, a kind of a mirage in front of your eyes, then you've got this nivritti gyan. One story I see of a Swami goes into an apartment that they had rented him for a talk, and it's up with a beautiful view over a lake, you see, and the devotees of that town, that city, gave him a beautiful apartment. So he walks in the room and he tells his brahmacharya, shut the curtains. And the brahmacharya goes, well, that's a beautiful view there. He says, I have everything I need inside, he said. So it shut out nature right away. So it's maybe not understandable to many of us, and and it's also a matter of choice that you can turn it on and turn it off. You can shut it out and let it in. For these souls who are more illumined, but to be obsessed with it at all times, as if it were the reality, is kind of the point and the risk, until you do have people who are thinking that matter is the only reality and that their body is their only station. But we've been talking about the great mind within, that your mind is an archetype of the cosmic mind, and the collective mind stands in between you and the cosmic mind, the individual mind, collective mind, and cosmic mind. And if you were watching our discourses in this room over the last 3 months or so, you would have come upon those teachings of Chittabhasa, reflection of Brahman in nature, followed by the mind is the kingdom of heaven courses of classes, which actually are beginning to be, these 2 are beginning to be put up on YouTube. So those of you who are looking on, it reminds me too, might as well say it, is the new Nectar of Non-Dual Truth is also out. We have brought it back with us from our recent Dharma visit to the mainland centers, SRV centers, and so those are available for people to take and read. Oops. So all of these things, looking back and looking ahead, are what we're engaged in constantly. And in this second half, we want to pick it up from the standpoint which we've reached now, which is the nivritti gyan. I was saying at the break that possibly the nivritti gyanis are people whose jnana isn't fully matured yet. That's why they're still following in an upper trajectory of aparavid. It's the vijnanis whom really don't X the world out of the occasion anymore. They include the world. How to explain that first you have to renounce it in order to see it as truly is, and then you can call it Brahman, has always been a very difficult thing to explain. But basically it's, you might say, the way I've thought of it is that the world as separate from Brahman is unreal. If you're considering it as a separate reality, then you've got the real primal or primeval duality there. And that's not going to work very well. But these vijnanis come to a place, where they see fire and wood and they can also bring it out, as Sri Ramakrishna's story is saying there on the chart. So they've seen the world to be nothing else but Brahman, and they do have different ways in which they understand that. Some of them see it as a reflection of Brahman, Chidabhasa. Some see it as an outright illusion, like some of the Buddhist schools, and some see it as a kind expression of Brahman, like the Tantrasists. So people are looking at it in different ways. However, the idea that it's a separate reality has to go. That's ignorance. It's avidya, plain and simple, and it can fall into mityagan, just, dumber than dumb. So there's dumb and dumber, and then there's dumberer, as they've been saying in Hollywood lately. So it's a movie that I heard about. So things can only get darker and denser in that scenario, and you can still be very intelligent and be very dark. Like physicists, we're still waiting for them to kind of get a clue about this inner trajectory that realized souls by the thousands have come and given verbal testimony to and written testimony to. Well, I was thinking at the break about how in one class I'll make it through one proof of truth. So let's see, 4 classes, 6 proofs of truth. Are we going to make it? Maybe I can speed up the process next week. But I want to show you what a vijnani consists of, and maybe that can be said by just saying, after one studies and apprentices with a teacher and then is able to explain truths to other people and help them do away with their own ignorance, so hands off, you basically, you don't ever presume to teach, because all knowledge is already within them. You're just removing veils, helping them remove veils. They have to do the work. This is good both for the ego of a teacher, which is a risk for the person who's putting on the robe of a teacher, as Ramakrishna used to say. It's also good for the people themselves, that they learn how to deal with their own problems. Be a lamp unto yourself. So it has a double-edged sword. We call that Mother's sword. The Divine Mother's sword. She's looking on, giving us the highest blessings on everything from that falls in the realm of knowledge, all the way down to even false knowledge. Because you might say, knowing after would start with false knowledge. You know nothing when you're a child, when you're a baby. It's just wiped out. And probably at the time of death, if you're not careful, get wiped out again. So this bespeaks of some ability, like my 90-year-old Swami before he passed away, being able to recite the entire Bhagavad Gita by heart in Sanskrit and in English, all 18 chapters. How did he do that when other people in their 70s and 80s had forgotten almost everything? So you must probably admit that there's such a thing as spiritual amnesia, and it's attacked the entire world, especially in the Kali Yuga, this day and age. And it proceeds by mechanism and technicality and obsession with matter and pleasure and domination over others, which are all asuric in nature. Those are cult powers. You don't want them. Crow droppings by the side of the road, Sri Ramakrishna said. Nobody would court them. So that's all that falls under pravritti gyan. Some of it has a nicer face, and some of it has a very unkind face, vicious face. But when you get to the level of nivritti gyan and you make this jump to paravidya, and there are little different interpretations about what paravidya is. 2 schools basically. One says paravidya would include the scriptures and everything in the Dharma, and the other says no, it only includes highest realization. You won't be able to put teachings in it. That will fall somewhere. That's why this line is very vague, you see, nivritti gyan. Paravidya could be so specialized as to only belong to those who know that I and my Father are one, or aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. That would be paravidya, and no doubt about that. So the only doubt comes in is whether these higher teachings that give you that kind of knowledge should be included in the category of Paravidya. 6 of one, half dozen of another, so we won't enter into argumentation or debate about it. But Vijnana, you can see here, transmitting the teachings to help free or liberate. Like I said, the doctor who became a Swami, who gave up the money-making doctor, and he became the go out and help everyone, Dr. Swami, you see. And that was just a natural move for him. It's what he wanted to do. And so transmitting the teachings to help and free other would be that same kind of thing. Perhaps you're a professor, or a Romain Roland or a Walt Whitman, or somebody who hears about this great truth from the Upanishads and decides you want to go and share it with others. Or you're an Alan Watts and you hear about Zen back in the 50s and 60s and you want to go share it with others. So all of a sudden you need to have people to listen, and then you have to be very careful to transmit it to them, knowing how the mechanism works. You all know the story when I was out and I was mowing the lawn for my Swami, you see, and he told me to put away the mower, and I put up the handle. It was one of those fold-up handles in the mower, and it wouldn't pull up, so I forced it. And there's just 2 little plastic tabs I should have pushed down, hidden of course, that I should have pushed down. I don't know how you do that with 2 hands and at the same time put up the handle in the first place. But anyway, making excuses for myself. But you somehow push those 2 down, then the handle goes up. But I forced it, and 2 tabs went winging off. I picked them up just about the time Swami walked up, of course. And so he looked at there, and I was waiting for the monumental and famous scolding to come my way. He looked at it, looked at me a couple times. He said, "That's a precision machine," he said, pointing to the mower. "You have to know how to work a precision machine." Then, here it came, you see, Vedanta also a precision machine. You must know how to work it. And he walked away. No scolding, nothing, as if that was immaterial what just happened, except that I learned, about the higher truth. So you go from lower truth to higher truth. Right then I was somewhere back at Anumana, knowing after, and getting verbal testimony and adding it to my own experience. So the 6 proofs of truth were like spinning around in there, trying to find a way, like a cog in a wheel, you see. So all of life is like that. And I'm saying that if you have a philosophical basis for things, because Vivekananda said everyone has to have an ideal, and a philosophy will give you that ideal. But it can't be a debating philosophy or a money-making philosophy. That all happens at the pravritti gyan level, and you can see how risky it is by just looking at the world or your own experience in the world. I mean, you do have a not knowing or a knowing after, but you do have a knowing after too. And so you'll get your own experience even at the lower level of things. But I don't want to go on too long. The first stage of Vijnana there seems to be transmitting the teachings to help free or liberate others. You have no other intention in mind than to do that. That's what you do it for. And it's called, like the 4 qualifications of a teacher. You have to be able to give them the teachings without any, you want to liberate them. You don't have any other intention or hidden agenda for that whatsoever. That's the only reason you're doing it. And that turns into a kind of worship too. Worship of the deities in a non-dual state of mind. That's a tongue twister. It's almost a Vedanta koan. But I saw my teacher live that. We first went to him, he was in his 80s, and we'd hear him preach Advaita Vedanta from the pulpit. Then we'd go in the back shrine room, which was hidden back there in the Vedanta Society, and we'd see him bending down, offering flowers to the pictures. We said, how does this work? Like preaching non-dual Vedanta here, and then entering into this apparent dualities here, worshipping images and all that. And he did it as if it were one breath, or just in one state of consciousness. So we realized later he was worshiping the deities in a non-dual state of mind. Everything is sacred. I mean, he used to say in his talks, renunciation is not condemnation, it's deification. So he was a person who had Vijnani style, looked at everything and included it into Brahman, after he had X'd out the separate world as being not Brahman. See? You couldn't have done both of that. You can't mix oil and water. I mean, we use that all the time for the kids, right? One's matter and one's spirit, or one's prakriti and one's purusha, or one's Brahman and one's nature, you see. And we'd say the kids, do they mix? And they say, oh yes, Babaji, they mix. But if you were to watch this for about 45 seconds, you'll see the separation process. So they don't mix. So I've used that as an analogy, talk about analogy and similitude, to say it's like oil and water, spirit and matter do not mix. They're not the same, of the same nature. So you would either have to X one out completely, at least for the time, to get to the other. Before you could say they don't mix but they have a relationship. So this is what the Tantrasists would be kind to, you see, because Swamiji was speaking much from the Tantra when he said, being a renunciate monk, saying renunciation is not condemnation, it's deification. So he must have had his own experience, because Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother were as much Tantra as they were Vedanta. You have to realize this. Vivekananda was very Vedanta, but he had hidden sides of Tantra in him too. He loved Mother Kali. But Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother looked like a tantric couple in a sense, you see. They were not the ordinary couple by any means. But to have that kind of experience in the Swami, he would be able to then be an example of being a monk in a non-dual state of mind, yet let you know that you don't condemn anything just because it's not spirit, you see. In fact, you probably want to find a way to connect it. And that would be yoga. So you've got Vedanta, you've got Tantra, and you've got yoga. And then schools that came after that, like Buddhism and so forth, that helped flesh all that out. And systems like this, the 6 Proofs of Truth, that helped you gain philosophical ideas. So transmitting the teachings to help and free others and worshipping the deities in a non-dual state of mind is what I came up with when I thought about this. What would be the state of a Vijnani in terms of, say, the yogas? The next is compassionate use of wisdom to remove suffering. So you don't just gather knowledge, you get wise, so you sit there and say, oh, you're so wise, you see. Now you want to have this wisdom to do what? To help remove suffering. Remove the ignorance of others, because that ignorance is causing them suffering. Isn't it pretty plain? Because there is a whole cross-section of, we said, demoniacal beings out there wreaking havoc on the world, but there's also a whole cross-section of suffering beings who aren't necessarily evil or even wreaking havoc on the world. They're just suffering the effects of what the evildoers are doing. So in that case then, wisdom reaches its highest use and utility. It's most efficacious to use against something like the presence of suffering. If you can use it at that high level, then you're going to reach an intellectual level of beings. But you're going to have to realize that there are many beings who aren't qualified yet, like we were talking in the car. There are many people who are just not ready to understand this, so you're going to have to go down and bring them up, say, by worship. See? One person said to me recently that dualism was nonsense. I said, no, it's a stage. It's a stage of things. It goes with qualified non-dualism and non-dualism. And Holy Mother said there have been people who have been reaching salvation by the thousands via worship, puja. Do you mean to say just because you're Advaitist that you want to pull the rug out from under them before they can understand that they are Brahman, or that I and my Father are one? Why should you do that? Then they'll never be able to understand by avastas, gradually, that they too are one with the Father. To be the perfect as the Father in heaven is perfect. So all of this is the province of the Vijnani. This is his territory, his or her territory, like Holy Mother. And there you see now, of course, some similitude, right? Analogy, inference, of all of it is pretty much in this. There's at least 3 of the proofs of truth right here in this little example. That's why we use it with the children, because the children probably aren't going to understand this for 3 or 4 generations in the West. And that's if we get cooking, you see. If we start getting into the kitchen of yoga and with the spices of devotion and the apron of wisdom on, and we start cooking this Vedanta, then maybe some of our children in 2 or 3 generations will get this. Because Swamiji would look at some of us sometimes in the West and say, oh, I don't really want you. I don't want your children. I want your children's children. He knew it wasn't a personal slant or assault. He knew that qualification was necessary and that you wouldn't understand this for generations, and you needed to start now because you were somewhere vibrating in the pravritti gyan worlds. See? That's hell, heaven, and earth, basically. Hell, heaven, and earth, back and forth in rounds of constant suffering. Read my scripture, you see. So, use of wisdom to remove suffering, that is the very last bit of valuable information you will find in the Bhagavad Gita at the very end. Last slokas, last page. Those who remove the ignorance that causes suffering from my children using wisdom, I call them my true children, Krishna says. So that's how important that is, because lower knowledge satisfies only for a time. Higher wisdom will satisfy for all time. And we are not realizing that. Even lifetimes after lifetimes of doctors, lawyers, businessmen, circuit judges, and so forth, that's not satisfying us and getting us free. And in fact, maybe it's not even giving us salvation, because I would define salvation as loving God so much that you go to Jesus, or you go to Buddha, or you go to Krishna, or Ram, or to Mother. That's salvation. So there's no doubt in you anymore. You don't need proofs of truth when he's standing or she's standing right in front of you, or when they come into your life, you see. Even through emissaries. I am Guru Bhyo Namaha, I am Parama Guru Bhyo Namaha, I am Para Guru Namaha, Om Paramesti Guru Bhyo Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha. This is a line we can trace back, and it's not very ancient as far as our memory goes. That's a kind of knowing after too. See? Oh, I came here and I belong to a lineage, but I didn't know it for a long time. It all happens in an eternal moment, you see, if it happens at all. It's all happening at all times in an eternal moment. So the past, present, and future sort of get X'd out of the equation here. And if you consider time and space to be real, backwards or upwards, then you're not going to understand this Dharma. So we're still waiting for intelligent people to recover this perspective and at least entertain it or do some experiments with it. And because I know in India there are devotees I've met who are doctors. There are devotees I've met who are lawyers. There are devotees I've met who are businessmen. They're not having any problem with the Dharma, with belief in God, or let's put it the opposite way, they're not obsessed with matter. One person, shopkeeper, I asked decades ago, said, well, you know, you're making money here on the street and all that. Why are you doing this? He says, for my God. Who else? I'm making money for my God. So that was just like a passing incident on the street that happened to me. And it's just average businessman on the street there is thinking in terms of divine reality. Even he's at a lower station, simple, humble, almost impoverished, burning incense, at the 2 or 3 hours of the day that is most auspicious, shutting down the shop, worshipping the picture, opening up the shop, making money. It's all for my God. Then we get to the penultimate one here, combining devotion and wisdom in meditation. About time we had 3 yogas here, because that's called Bhakti, Gyan, and Dhyan, or Bhakti, Gyan, and Raja, if you want to give it the threefold designation. Karma would be the 4th yoga would be very natural, wouldn't it, if you could combine those 3. So that's a property, again, of a vijnani. That's why sometimes we sing to him about that. That is Swami Vivekananda, whose beautiful image is there, teaching by his very bones, teaching people in India before he even left the country, and of course after he came back. So we would sing something like Vimoksham Svatmanas Chaturyogadvabihi Pritagva Samhatair Hitam Lokashyacha Tavagya Sadayediti Prichanaraha Viveka Nandate Prabhate Pranjalihi Narendra Shashave Narendra Yovane Narendra Kridane Narendra Shikshane Narendra Palane Narendra Harpane Viveka Nandate Prabhate Pranjali Viveka Nandate Prabhate Pranjali. All of these verses of this Vivekananda Pranjalihi, we call it. This is the 10th. He says, O Vivekananda, your message transmitted from the platform of non-duality is for the realization of the soul and the good of the world. By reinterpreting and coalescing the 4 yogas and making them accessible and understandable to humanity, you have destroyed the foundations of ignorance in this age and ushered in a new era. In this auspicious dawn of illumination, O Vivekananda, we offer you our complete salutations. So a perfect verse that goes with this province of the luminary, which is what I would be showing next week when we get to it. So that only leaves the final one to finish this chart, the acquisition of direct spiritual experience. So you're talking about, again, perception based on testimony that gives you this non-dual wisdom. You can see that even studying one of these almost includes the other 5. Remember the teaching on the 4 sentinels, which is actually a chart I mean to show soon, because none of you have seen it in its color version yet. But they say if you just take one of the sentinels at the gate, the 4 gates of the city, and know him, he'll, bring him some cigar and some beer and stuff and whatever he likes, you see. And then he'll like you see. And then he'll talk to the other 3 gates, because they have a union, you see, like gate guards union that they go to. So and he says, oh, there's a very nice man that brings me all sorts of good things, so I let him out the gate at night. Nobody knows about it. I let him back in before dawn. I don't care what he's doing, you see. He's probably smuggling mules, as we say in Vedanta. So whatever the case, one sentinel familiarizes you with the other 3. And so in that teaching of Lord Vashishta, you have all 4 sentinels if you just court one. Well, basically this is too, you can see how we've just been studying Anumana, and it's referred so many times to these other 5. So we've really already read the first quote there, a top quote, as about the Vijnani knowing how to bring fire out of wood, whereas the others don't. So let's move on in the time remaining to another way of saying, and this is Lord Vashishta's teaching. This is the Jnana and Ajnana Bhumikas. Much like the 10 Pure Lands of Buddhism, somewhat similar. This is a good way of explaining knowing after. Anumana. A means to getting higher knowledge from lower knowledge. So this describes, whereas the last chart described it in terms of the individual making avastas and stages from lower truth to higher truth, this describes the entire human race, how it's proceeding. And the basis for this is waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. You can see these lower knowledges, as they're called, basically waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Sushupti is the 7th of lower stages of lower knowledge. Ajnana Bhumikas, they're Bhumikas, lands of ignorance. And it explains it very well on what happens to us when we're born. So a person under the aspects of Mityagan, or we call it Mula Vidya, his Bindu Jagrat. So it has the world as its only focus. And it forgot everything when it came through the curtain of nescience and took a birth with parents, and due to the impetus of its own karma, began to enjoy and suffer and create more karma. So basically you see here, these 7 go to 7 higher states. The lower 7 is root state of ignorance. That's called Mula Vidya. We could have put it on this chart, but probably good to put it around with Michigan. It's a really not knowing anything yet. Can you remember it? Being in your family as a very young boy or girl, and so, being confused and what's this all about? Maybe you're a happy little child, but at times you were confused and didn't really have any access to what was within you yet. So it's a very good idea about knowing after. And then it proceeds towards incipient manifestation of the jiva. So this is what they call an embodied being per se, that this is how the jiva comes about. The jiva really is Shiva, as my teacher used to say that. The jiva really is Shiva, but it doesn't know it yet. So it's a very good example of Anumana. You really are the Atman, if you want to put it Vedantically, but you think you're the body. So this is the nature of the jiva in ignorance. And unfortunately, it happens to, and amazingly, it happens to everyone. I think the veils aren't lifted off for maybe 8 years, 7 years in the case of Shankara. So it's just the nature of the mechanism not being developed yet. The brain isn't developed yet. The body doesn't have facility. The senses aren't very honed yet. But when all this comes rushing back, whether it happens at 8 years old or 10 years old or 12 or 14 like it did with Jesus or so forth, and with Buddha when he left the palace, it comes rushing back, and you see all of it. And it's not a case of not knowing after anymore. It's a case of immediate knowledge. It's like you've jumped from Anumana to Pratyaksham, these great beings, in one fell swoop, see. And that it's happened to so many enlightened beings is proof of its own self, is that this knowledge pre-exists ignorance, and that ignorance is really unreal. And so we have quotes in the Avadhuta Gita and in the Ashtavakra Samhita that are very beautiful about that. and teachings and verses I could sing out of the Avadhuta Gita that are very beautiful. But let's keep going with this, because we want to make headway. If that soul who is in the state of the incipient manifestation of the jiva, thinking himself to be just this body, with no higher knowledge whatsoever, took one step inward, he'd be at the second stage of lower knowledge, awareness of individuation and inception of differentiation, is how Vishishta put it to Sridham in the teachings of the Dharma. So he's gone from a tiny world, Bindu, if you might say, to a larger world. Now I'm an individual, you see. And this is either a stage of manifestation towards the mature individual, or it's a real trap if you get stuck there. And we don't see many people in this day and age moving out of that level of the world is real, as the last chart showed us, from everything from pravritti down to mitjigyan. So he's aware of himself as an individual, and therefore it tightens the knots of the idea of deha jasa hamkara, that I am the body. And so the evolutes of Maya are at work. How to break these bonds, how to snap these chains. Of course, finding some authority is going to be the best way, but you have to qualify yourself and prepare yourself for that authority. So, again, moving on, Mahajagrat would be like the great world. All of a sudden, the progression of repeated rebirths occurs to you, and you believe man and the universe to be dissimilar. So those two, once held together, means that some idea comes to you that I've been here before, and at the same time, though, it's not going to mature because you don't know that the universe came out of you. I mean, this is a big problem that in the West for us. We think God created the universe and that God is a creator, and those things are not allowed. They're not even thought of in Vedanta and Yoga and Tantra. The mind did all that. So you don't blame God for this horrible mess you see all around you, and combining of the five elements into various objects and people's attachment to it, and the fact that some suffer and some enjoy, and some come illumined and some come totally ignorant. You don't bring divine reality into that whatsoever, because it's non-dual. And everything I just said had an opposite. Bondage and liberation is an opposite. So you can see how those two would be very hard to hold together and make any philosophical sense out of it. And that's where things shift to a kind of swapna. Swapna means dream, but you must consider that all of this is a dream that collective minds are having. Lord Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are having a huge cosmic dream. And when they wake up from it, they'll disappear back into Brahman. They'll turn to the Om, and they'll dissolve into Om. They know it's a dream. And many beings in the upper echelons of consciousness, they also know it's a dream. So they're taking on the dream consciously. And this is why they keep their knowledge, and why they will nurture it through 90 years, like my Swami did. And that's like the pole star, that's like the life raft. Those things are not to be let go of. Dharma, basically. Not to be let go of ever. It's the only, if anything's real here, that's it, you see. Because Brahman isn't here, so it's not in the world is in Brahman, as Vivekananda used to say. So Swapna, look at some of these points Vishishta makes. The soul, Jagrat Swapna, the soul seeks sovereignty over nature. Sovereignty over nature implies some sort of freedom from nature. It wants to master it. Of course, that can run afoul when it gets attached to resources, like we see in this day and age. Next to that is, gets attached to objects. Oops. Now, if you tried to get sovereignty over nature, but you didn't have this, then you would be a free soul. You'd master nature, but you wouldn't covet its objects. Like the sannyasins, like the yogis. That just describes them to a T. They've mastered nature, it's called kaivalya. At the same time, they never got attached to what they mastered. So this isn't going to mix, you see. These are another one of those things that's not going to mix. Renunciation has to be absolute, otherwise you're on the pravritti trajectory and not the nivritti trajectory. So the monks have a lot to teach us by way of example. They might not even come out of the monasteries as they're busy working on their own nut, you see, of enlightenment, higher enlightenment, not just higher knowledge. But they are examples of how to do this. Maybe one example, one good example. But next to that, you could see the Jagrat Swapna state still labors under delusion. It's not getting higher knowledge, obviously. Now when Jagrat Swapna, the world dream you might call that, turns into just dream, then you see some objectivity is gained, so some light gets into that tunnel. Then if that happens, the soul can examine life's events as if they were a dream. And maybe that's the beginning of, gee, maybe I doubt this. Maybe that's the beginning of, let's take the wool off my own eyes. Let's see clearly. Let's get some clarity around this, even if I have to go to a teacher to do it, or read a book, a good book to do it. I've got some urge to be free. So the soul is beginning to writhe in the hot frying pan of the world. It's like Sri Ramakrishna said, if you hold the beak of the pigeon, male pigeon, it'll struggle to get away. See, it doesn't like that. See? You can hold it in its hand, it'll stay there, hold its beak. I don't like that, you see. So he's talking about beings that do not want to be bound by nature. What to speak of their own ignorance, which has gotten them into nature. They want to make sure to attenuate that and to get free of it by the end of their life. Like Asheshananda, my teacher's name. No residue at the end. I'll live as like as if I were walking over rice paper without leaving a wrinkle. Or as if I was a bird moving through the sky, leaving no trace. There are different metaphors, similitudes, you see, that you can use to help you with that. I think I'll be a bird moving through the sky, not leaving a trace. You're using similitude there, you see, upamana. And then you follow through with it. Now let's look at the sixth state, Svapna Jagrat. Now this is where the dream begins to, because you've gained objectivity about it being a dream or dream-like, begins to take the world and transform it. So you can see here, you recall events long past, and you render the waking state lucid. So this is still lower knowledge, but you can see how, according to Lord Vashishta's description of these 7 advancing Agyana Bhumikas, that they're gradated and they're leading towards something much finer in terms of levels of your own consciousness. You are moving within, obviously, because people who are still just in an external state are not thinking this is a dream. Their pain is real, their suffering is real, their money is real, family is real, their prospects are real, and they get suffering and pleasure from them. That's real. So they haven't moved to the state that, oh, I think it's all kind of dreamlike, it's all changing. I can't build my house on sand, or however you want to call this, They're not looking for the bedrock of higher wisdom, which is the real thing that they're missing. It's not bad enough that they're just going to recycle again back to the Jagrat state of the world, but they're going to miss out on all the blessings of spiritual life that the Divine Mother herself has for them, which they themselves have very deep within them. So Sri Ramakrishna says that's why many people's gold is just buried under mounds of earth. But these 16 young boys who came from me, I just brushed off a few pebbles and their gold was shining right near the surface, you see. So the few pebbles were, having to come through Maya in the first place to help us. Didn't we say that was what the Vijnani does? Comes to remove suffering through compassion. So they're putting up with these early states in order to help us. So they've got a few pebbles they have to take on to do that. And they want to make sure to go to Sri Krishna, can you remove these pebbles? See? Sure. Another guy comes, dense ignorance. Can you remove these pebbles? Those are mounds of earth. Let me go see if I can rent a backhoe. You see? And renders waking state lucid. So you see people walking around like Vivekananda with his eyes gazing in the air like a mother bird hatching her eggs. So the waking state has actually beginning to turn into Brahman for them. They don't find any objection here. Since they were able to reject it, all its poisons, everything, but then when they took all the poisons out, all the beauty was there. See, and it was Brahman's beauty. So they were able to move amongst the objects without being attached to the objects, which wasn't the case for these lower states. And they were beginning to connect the A of Om to the U of Om. And that's waking and dreaming, right? In Advaita Vedanta. The word is AUM. So that's waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. In other words, Jagrat, Swapna, and Sushupti. Well, Sushupti is finally occurring at the 7th stage. I told you we were going to go through this, so hold on to your dhotis and kamisas. As we do so, we are rising to the top like cream, philosophically speaking. So the 7th state of lower knowledge, which is the highest state of lower knowledge, Vishishta actually has a lot to say about it, but it's called Sushupti, which definitely means deep sleep. So what happened to the world and what happened to the dream of the world? The soul here realizes all states are beset with pain. What happened to the dream and waking state is, I don't like them anymore. They're beset with pain. Who does it remind you of? The first noble truth of Lord Buddha, there is suffering. Who else does it remind you of? Holy Mother, the suffering of this world has gotten into the very marrow of my bones. When she looked at others, you see, and saw them suffering. So you want to transcend pain and suffering. It's a teacher for a while. It's a better teacher than pleasure, they say, but it still comes in turns. So basically you're going to want to watch out at this Sushupti stage that you realize that waking and dreaming have pain inherent in them, like bad dreams or mixed dreams. And that goes side by side with perceiving all worlds in Maya. So probably if you want to connect Anumana at this time, because we're going from knowing after, is what we're describing here, you're beginning to pull in some of these other proofs of truth. And like verbal testimony and similitude and presumption due to circumstantial evidence is beginning to occur to you again and again as you go through these stages, although you might not be calling it that or even thinking that way. Nevertheless, it's your culminating experience, just like you have a bunch of experiences over a few, 2 or 3 hard weeks, and you're going, boy, that was a hard period. But you look back on it and you say, it's over, and this is what I got from it. You see, I've made a conclusion. I don't really like my friends of my childhood. After all, I don't want to be around them anymore, you see. So, conclusion, may I never get into this again. You see, I don't want to go through that again. So it's waking up from a dream based on the knowledge that there's pain in the dream, and also that this is a Mayic world. Ignorance is Maya. Maya is ignorance. In the 15 minutes remaining, I wanted to, hopefully we'll even get through one of these truths the way I wanted to present it. So let's go on with the Jnana Bhumikas. What happens at the lowest of the 7 stages of Jnana Bhumika? That is stage 8 if you're counting from the bottom up in numerical order. It's called Shubhecha. That's a wonderful word for Vashishta and his teachings. Attraction to the path of indifference. So if you've seen it all to be a dream, you've seen it all Maya, right there all of a sudden you just make this change to the Jnana Bhumika. And you might not even see that happening to yourself. Or you might wake up one day and my ignorance is gone, gone, utterly gone, as the song sings. But whatever the case, you have changed. And you can see that. I've seen that in people who came to the path, had friends, and their friends dropped away. Or people who came to the path, brought their family didn't like the path, and they stayed. So basically, this is the one soul is getting attracted to the path of indifference. The others won't have anything. There's not a trace of them to be seen, as Vivekananda said. They're gone. Can't catch a whiff of them, he said. As soon as they see that, giving up the world ideas, gone, you see. But these others remain behind, you see. So they've begun to qualify themselves with knowledge, with real knowledge. That's nivritti gyan. You know, that's what'll lead you. That's maybe the beginnings of perception, real perception in them. Also, desires and enjoyments. They desire to enjoy jnana essence, jnana swarupa, in Vashishta speak. You see, so it's not just that they become indifferent. Everything's empty now. Oh wait, there's this wisdom, like Dharma, is really attracting me. Like someone said to me at the break, he said, "There's nothing like this. You know, I'm here full time. I want to hear this again and again. Go out in the world, nothing like it. So I want to be here for it, just like I wanted to be here when Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, bliss be upon him, said it to us for those many years we had him in the body." So you begin to enjoy the essence of Jnanam. And is there any essence in the world to enjoy? You probably found that it was empty of substance, empty of the desire to fulfill you. And that it wasn't empty of essence, though, if you can look back on it. That's knowing after. This is knowing before, not knowing after. See, this is knowing after. So you're beginning to move on. Truth is being proven to you by your own experience, slowly but surely. Next, you seek guidance from an illumined soul. Bang! You've got verbal testimony and written testimony. And you study Atmagyan scriptures. That's the written testimony. So Shabda is on you, and we'll look at that later. Shabda means anything from the word, which we'll actually have a retreat in November here in Hawaii on the word and all its teachings. It'll be a great retreat for us here. People from the mainland hope will come. And but Shabda can mean that, but it can also mean this kind of testimony that you get from illumined souls. We call it holy company, sadhu satsanga, which is one of those 4 sentinels we just mentioned. So it don't get no better than this, maybe, compared to what you were suffering in Swapna and Sushupti. But now you're in Subhecha. You've left behind waking, dreaming, and deep sleep kind of ideations. And you're attracted to the path of non-attachment. You desire Jnana essence. You get guidance from an illumined soul, and you study the scriptures. That all right in a row is what Vashishta says to the 14-year-old Sri Ram in Lord Vashishta's scripture, his own scripture, about this first level of true knowledge, or the 8th level of the Bhumikas. See how nicely it's mapped out thousands of years ago. You have to remember how far we're looking back when we say the word Vashishta. One of the 10 mind-born sons of Lord Brahma. Mind-born sons. He came and took a physical body too. Now you have Vicharana, The second stage of higher knowledge, you inquire into the nature of reality. So jnana essence, you're enjoying it, but you need to inquire deeper. So you begin not just studies on Atmagyan, you begin contemplation of the Atman itself. You attain virtues thereof, and you increase your spiritual aspirations thereby. And that's all vicharana. You know, Atma Vichara is one of the great systems in India that has been so, recently put forth by Ramana Maharshi when he was in the body. So Atma Vichara means inquire into the nature of the self, the true self. So Vicharana was there. You might call Lord Vashishta and Ramana Maharshi the two bookends in history, in recorded history that we know of, that are propounding this path of deep inquiry. I don't know how to explain the profundity of it, or even to explain how a person might turn to it out of the world. They'd want to examine their own consciousness. Actually, I do know how to say, I'm going to use similitude. Because like Sixteen used to say, like an Eskimo studies snow conditions every day, you have to study your own consciousness. There. It came to me, thank you, Mother. Why does an Eskimo study snow conditions? His life depends on it. How dense the snow, how deep it is, what kind of consistency is, if it's melting, if it's frozen, if there are tracks in it, if there's any yellow snow around. There's a lot of reasons to study snow that are very practical, believe me. So this is how you have to feel about studying your own consciousness. And how do we explain that to people? It's just like their eyes would start wandering in their head, as if they're trying to look into their brain. No, look into your heart. In the shrine of your heart, connected by 100,000 nadis, like the spokes of a chariot wheel at the hub, there is your Atman. There is your true self. Meditate on that as Om, the word. And God speeds you in crossing over to the farther shore beyond all darkness. That's from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. So Vicharana, what more to say about it? Very subtle, but those who understand, understand. And those who don't, somehow don't. The third level, Tanumanasa. Freedom from desires, which, is surprising. You think you would have got rid of those back here. But you can see how they persist. So subtle desires are still there. So those are going to have to go away by degrees too. You're satisfying dharmic desires, if you want to put it that way. So be patient. Then mastery of concentration. You tried to contemplate on the Atman and it didn't quite work. Or it worked only when you were in sattva. It didn't work when you were in rajas and tamas, when the mind was in rajas and tamas, rather. So you had to wait for those gears to come together at one time during the year when you could see through the clock. It was a clock story in Calcutta, Sri Ramakrishna told, where it was a big clock that, with all these gears in a glass casing, you see. If you were there at that 1 hour when the clock, you could see through the whole clock to the other side. Your friend could wave to you, from the other side. That's because the gears all lined up in such a way that there was an opening. All the rest of the days of that year, that didn't happen. So you have to wait for that auspicious moment and be there for it. Rabindranath Tagore has a wonderful song where he says, "Oh, I waited for you, Lord. I wanted to see you. I knew you were coming. I wanted so bad to see you. I waited until midnight. You didn't come. I had even set dinner for you. You didn't come to eat. Then I waited till 1, then 2. You still didn't show up. Then I took a little nap. I woke up. I found out you came and went." It was just a half-hour nap, you see. Oh, Lord. So you have to be there. If you're there 24/7 for your jobs, people, this is what the seer or the vijnani the attainer of the highest bhumikas or lands, the knower of the Atman, will do when they keep vigil to wait on realization of their own self, which is Brahman. Atman and Brahman are one. And if a Christian pastor said this to me, he's from India, so he would say this. This mudra means the coming together of Brahman and Atman. So that's an interesting, unique way of explaining that mudra, which is usually like the Buddhist perfection mudra and so forth, but the coming together of Atman and Brahman. So they are always one, but you have to be there to make sure that you understand that they're one, so that, because there are so many people who have, even Gyanis, who have fallen from that goal, they say. Even the Gyani can fall from that insight. Besides, there's Maya and some pebbles to make your way through every birth you take. So how impacted and how deeply impacted is your Jnanam that you will not be able to lose it under any circumstances. This is what these stages of knowledge are beginning to do for the Vijnani. Here we're at the level of a Vijnani. So let's go on to, did we cover Tanumasa? Mastery of Tanumanasa, mastery of concentration leading to transcendence of mind, and then that frees you to reach the fourth state. So transcendence is a very rare thing, to be able to contemplate your Atman and then fall back from it. Oh, I'll try again, then fall back from it. You know, some seers have described this. Finally, you reach a total transcendence of mind where the Atman becomes samadhana. Your concentration is like one, pouring oil from one beaker to another. It's unbroken. And so samadhana is a special kind of concentration that all the pravritti elements are gone and the nivritti elements are present. Only Brahman exists, and you're contemplating that all the time. So you see how Sri Ramakrishna would be walking around seeing the ordinary world, but seeing Brahman and being in bliss. How any little thing might put him into a high state of mind. So super sensitive to spiritual suggestion. Then sattvapati. I even like the sound of that. So we had artapati, and we talked about utpati. Now here's sattvapati. Mind adheres to truth. Intelligence gets illumined. Vision gets equal. And all that can be said comes from the state of mature detachment. We've looked at the lower truth, the higher truth chart previous to this. You should be able to plug that in where a Paravidya attains Paravidya, where the Nivritti Jnani reaches the Vijnani state, and that would describe very well, reaches mature detachment. And then Asam Shakti. We like the sound of that too because it's almost English. It's awesome. She's awesome. But this is ASAM, and it means this stage of knowledge, Vashishta tells Sri Ram, is where you get to merge into the Atman, like a hailstone in an ocean, Shankara has said. He had that experience. Oh, the infinite ocean of Brahman, upon which, oh, it's raining out. Nice. So, the infinite ocean of Brahman, with its nectar-like swell of the Atman, into which my mind merged like a hailstone. That's how he describes it in the Vivekachudamani. Beautiful. What am I using there? Upamana. See, similitude. It was like a hailstone merging into an ocean. I'm trying to describe this to you, you see, he's saying. So I'm using one of these proofs of truth to try and impress upon you how I felt. Merges in Atman, attains certitude of non-duality. That's very rare. You can talk about it, but to attain it, its absolute certainty would be the absence of all doubt at all levels. And also transcends the gunas. Now that's kept aside for a very, very rare state of consciousness, Trigunatita. One of Sri Ramakrishna's direct disciples named himself Trigunatita because his idea was to get beyond the three gunas. So that would be getting beyond Prakriti, both its manifested side and its unmanifested side. He doesn't care whether the gunas are in equilibrium or not. He wants beyond the whole shooting match. When they're not in equilibrium, when they are in equilibrium, that doesn't mean they're not going to go out of equilibrium, and I might be pulled in with them. So how about just transcending them all, completely and entirely? Atita, going beyond, transcending. The three gunas, of course, are that cycle in which everything is caught. Krishna talks about it in the Gita. Everything comes into being by the three gunas under my regime of Prakriti. Beings are dragged, into, despite their best intentions, are dragged into this process because they haven't got the wherewithal to keep themselves out of it. So this takes, of course, a very rarefied consciousness to reach what's called Padartha Bhavana. Now Turiya, and we know that's also beyond waking, dreaming, deep sleep, so the chart does follow the Advaitic way of Jagrat, waking, Swapna, dreaming, Sushupti, deep sleep, and then finally, after these various levels, it gets itself to Turiya, the fourth. It just means the fourth, so it means that beyond your waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, there's this samadhi, there's this light of Brahman, there's absolute yogic equipoise, peace that passes all understanding, so forth and so on. And you can almost taste it, right, by hearing me say about it. You just almost go into samadhi and this eye will open. So that would be what the effects of verbal testimony would have on you. You'd get your own perception, and then you'd go beyond to anupalabdhi. Well, I'm going to have fun when we get to anupalabdhi to show you non-apprehension. Let's finish up because we have reached the end of our time in this class, first class on the 6 proofs. Turiya has to do with just abiding in the self. We just sang it. O Lord, take away all duality, because only Atman abides. May I abide in it always at all times. And getting rid of the ocean of samsara and cycles of endless suffering. That's it. Ananda. Sat Chit Ananda. Rests in the disembodied liberation. That's called videha mukti. Down here you're krama mukti. Knowing after. You're moving slowly towards some liberation you already had. But you had to follow the processes because of your karma and various things. And then you reach the state where you reach Jivan Mukta. You got free. And then when you were free, you wanted everyone else to be free. And so you worked your way up to this Videha Mukti, that you don't have to take a body anymore because there's nothing but freedom. In fact, there's no individual souls to get bound. How can you talk about bondage and freedom when there's no more individual soul? There's only when the soul individualized itself that you talked about such nonsense. And it was a dream, too. So now you've reached this highest state, and it's like it's too much trouble to open and close my eyes anymore. That's how the Avadhuta Gita expresses it, or Ashtavakra expresses it. See, I came to a place where I was so one with Brahman that it was too much trouble to open and close my eyes. He just wanted to sit there with his eyes half open like Shiva and just enjoy to the nth degree the bliss of the self. He's abiding in the self, he rests in the disembodied state, and he enters immersion. In Buddhism and in Lord Vasishtha's teachings too, there is a penultimate state to immersion called absorption. So the hailstone may have fallen in the ocean, but it's not fully absorbed yet, it's getting absorbed. It's losing its form. But then there's a state of immersion which is just, water is water. There's no difference anymore between I and thou, God and man. Liberation and bondage. The I is all become, and all is I, and bliss. And thou art that, Sannyasin bold. Say Om Tat Sat Om. So here we will end with a chant out of the, in fact, let's go ahead and say the Asato chant so we remind ourselves of the lower to higher truth principle. Om Asato, Om Asato Ma Sadgamoya, Tamaso Ma Joytir Gamoya, Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamaya, Abira Bira Maeti, Rudrayate Dakshinamukam, Tenamam Pahinicham, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from lower truth to higher truth. Lead us from the unreal to the real. And lead us from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother of the universe, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.